Welcome to my channel. Today, I'm sharing a powerful and deeply personal story called Trying to Speak for the First Time, a journey from silence to self-expression in English. It begins with the fear and hesitation many of us feel when we want to speak but don't know how, continues through the daily struggle of learning and practicing, and arrives at the empowering realization that making mistakes is part of the process. Along the way, we'll explore how speaking English isn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about courage, identity, and connection. This story will ask you questions that matter. What's holding you back from speaking? Are you practicing enough to build fluency or waiting to be perfect before you begin? Have you allowed yourself to make mistakes, or are you still stuck in fear? If you've ever felt nervous, embarrassed, or stuck in your English journey, this story is your mirror and your motivation. I created this channel to give learners like you a space where your voice is heard, your efforts are celebrated, and your progress is real. So if this speaks to you, don't forget to like, comment, and hit subscribe, because your English journey deserves support, community, and momentum. Let's grow your confidence one sentence at a time, starting today. Seedling speech balloon, studio microphone. The silence before the voice. For as long as I could remember, English had always felt like a distant city I could see from the mountains of my own language. It glittered at night with promise, doors opening, people conversing easily, opportunities unfolding in the glow of fluency. But I stood far from that city, behind a fog of hesitation, my mouth often sealed not by lack of knowledge but by fear. My journey to speak for the first time began not in a classroom or through a textbook, but in silence, in the quiet rooms of my mind where I played entire conversations in English without sound. Every word I didn't say in real life, I rehearsed 10 times in my head. I knew the structure. I knew the vocabulary. I knew the logic. But still, I could not cross the invisible line from understanding to speaking. I remember vividly the day I was first expected to speak. It was during an intermediate English class I had enrolled in after months of self-study. The instructor, a cheerful woman with a kind but probing voice, turned to me after explaining a grammar point. "What do you think about this rule? Can you give an example?" My heart raced, my breath shallow. I knew the rule. Present perfect with since and for. I had practiced it the night before. But now, with every eye on me, the words scattered like frightened birds. My lips parted, a faint escaped, and then silence. The teacher waited patiently, encouragingly, but the seconds stretched like hours. Eventually, I muttered, "I have lived here for many years." The sentence was broken, unsure. "Years," she corrected gently, smiling. "Good start." I nodded, but inside, I felt the sting of exposure. I had finally spoken, but it had not felt triumphant. It had felt like failure. But something changed after that moment. For the first time, the fear had a shape. It was no longer abstract. It was real. And because it was real, it was something I could face. I realized that the act of speaking was not about perfection. It was about trying, about showing up in front of others without armor. Every stumble was not a mistake, but a step. I began to speak more often in class, even if my sentences came out in fragments. I learned to laugh at my errors and repeat them correctly. I started keeping a small notebook where I wrote down every new word I used successfully in conversation, every phrase that felt right on my tongue. It became a kind of personal trophy case, my progress charted not in grades, but in moments of courage. Practice became my daily ritual. In the mornings, I read aloud from English novels, exaggerating the intonation just to feel the rhythm. I recorded myself speaking and played it back, cringing at first but gradually noticing improvement. In conversations, I forced myself to contribute at least one thought, however simple. "I agree. That's interesting. Can you explain more?" These phrases became my footholds on the mountain. I joined online language exchanges, chatting with strangers who, like me, were struggling forward. We made mistakes together, and in that mutual vulnerability, we found strength. With each session, I grew more comfortable in my skin. My English didn't just live in my head anymore. It was finding a voice. What surprised me most was not the technical improvement, but the emotional shift. Speaking English became more than a skill. It became a way to express the parts of me that had long remained hidden. I found myself saying things I had never said in my own language. I wrote journal entries in English about dreams and fears, memories and plans. The language gave me distance from my emotions, but also clarity. I could be someone slightly different in English, bolder, more curious, more experimental. And this new version of me slowly seeped into all areas of life. I began participating in group discussions, raising my hand during workshops, even delivering a short speech at a community event. I still made mistakes, of course, but I had made peace with them. They were part of the journey, finding rhythm in the struggle. As I began to speak more often, I noticed that my inner dialogue had started to change. Where once there had been constant criticism, "You sound ridiculous," "They're laughing at your accent. Why did you say that?" Now, there was a quieter voice, patient and kind. "It's okay," it said. "You tried. That's how you learn." It was a voice I had cultivated through consistent practice and reflection. Every day after class, I would sit with my journal and write not just in English, but about English. What phrases had I struggled with today? What words made me pause? What had I wanted to say but couldn't? Writing became a mirror, and through it, I discovered that the fear I had once felt wasn't just about language. It was about identity. Speaking in English had exposed me to a version of myself that was incomplete, still forming. And that scared me, but also excited me. It was like watching yourself being rebuilt in real time. My classmates became co-travelers on this uncertain road. We came from different countries, Vietnam, Brazil, Egypt, Turkey, but we shared the same vulnerability. Our common language was not just English. It was effort. We laughed at each other's mispronunciations and awkward phrasing, but not unkindly. In our missteps, we saw ourselves. I remember one day during group discussion, I was explaining a story I had read when I mixed up success with sucks. The sentence came out. The ending was full of sucks. Everyone burst out laughing, including me. At that moment, something shifted permanently. I realized that mistakes weren't just inevitable. They were essential. They were evidence that we were trying. They were the price of growth. After that day, I stopped apologizing so much. I stopped prefacing my opinions with "sorry, my English is not good." I had spoken. That was good enough. One evening, I decided to attend an open speaking event at the local library, a language cafe, where people came to practice English in real-world conversations. I hesitated at the door for a long time. My heart pounded like a warning drum. What if I freeze? What if no one understands me? But something deeper in me, something old and stubborn, pushed me forward. I joined a table of strangers, all chattering in English, some fluently, some hesitantly. When it was my turn to introduce myself, I took a breath. "Hello, my name is Ravi. I am from India. I am learning English because I want to tell my story." My voice shook, but it was clear. Heads nodded. Smiles appeared. Someone asked, "What kind of story?" And just like that, I was speaking, not perfectly, not confidently, but I was there participating, sharing, breathing in the rhythm of a new language. From that night, I realized that English was not just a subject to study. It was a world to enter. And the only way in was through practice, persistence, and the acceptance of imperfection. I began to consume English not as a passive observer, but as a participant. I watched movies with subtitles off, repeated lines out loud, shadowed dialogues, mimicked accents. I read articles, and paused after each paragraph to summarize out loud. I recorded voice notes to myself about my day, then listened back with a red pen and corrected the grammar. These practices weren't homework, they were life. English became woven into my daily routine, like brushing my teeth or making tea. It stopped feeling foreign. It started feeling familiar. Gradually, I noticed the moments when English stopped being a challenge and started becoming a tool. At a cafe, I helped a tourist order their food when the waiter struggled to understand their accent. At work, I translated a technical manual into simpler English so my colleagues could understand it better. One day, my younger cousin came to me with her English homework, asking for help. As I sat next to her, explaining how to form conditionals and when to use will versus would, I realized I had become the teacher I once needed. I wasn't fluent yet, not in the way I imagined fluency, effortless, fast, automatic, but I was functioning. I was expressing myself. That was more important than sounding native. I had stopped chasing perfection and started chasing connection. Still, there were days when progress felt slow, even invisible. I would listen to podcasts and feel frustrated that I couldn't catch every word. I would speak with someone and later replay the conversation, hearing all the things I could have said better. But now, instead of letting that frustration sink into shame, I turned it into fuel. I reviewed transcripts, added phrases to my Anki flashcards, asked questions in forums. I had learned how to learn, and perhaps that was the real victory. Not the speaking itself, but the practice of becoming better every day. Speaking for the first time had unlocked a door, but it was the steady work afterward that kept it open. The voice that changed me. As I became more comfortable speaking English, I began to notice a subtle shift in how people responded to me and how I responded to myself. In the beginning, I had spoken quietly, almost apologetically, as though asking permission to be heard. My voice, uncertain and flat, echoed my own self-doubt. But now, there was intention behind my words. My sentences carried rhythm. My tone rose and fell with emotion. It wasn't just about vocabulary anymore, it was about presence. English was no longer just a second language. It was a second skin. I wore it differently each day, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with surprising confidence. I had discovered that language is not just something we speak, it is something we inhabit. In conversations, I began to assert opinions. I no longer waited to be asked. I joined in. During class debates, I spoke up first instead of last. I started volunteering for group presentations, something I once avoided like fire. I remember a day when we had to give a talk on a global issue, and I chose climate change. I practiced the speech dozens of times, correcting my phrasing, adjusting my tone. When the day came, I stood at the front, palms sweating, heart galloping, but I spoke. Loudly, clearly, and when I finished, the class clapped, not politely but genuinely. The teacher said, "That was powerful." That night, I didn't even care that I had mixed up carbon emission with carbon omission. I had delivered my message. I had connected. Socially, the impact was even more profound. English opened doors I didn't know existed. I made friends from countries I had only seen on maps. We bonded over music, food, books, and our struggles with this common language. There was Maria from Colombia who taught me how to dance salsa while explaining phrasal verbs like put up with. There was Yin from Korea who sent me memes that made no sense until I learned idioms like spill the beans and beat around the bush. Language wasn't just grammar and pronunciation. It was humor, emotion, storytelling. Through English, I learned not just how to talk, but how to listen. And through listening, I learned about the world. It was also through English that I started building a bridge to my professional future. At first, I had simply hoped to speak well enough to pass interviews. But the more I practiced, the more confident I became in my abilities. I began attending networking events, joining webinars, asking questions. I updated my resume in English. I practiced mock interviews with language partners. I learned the subtle tones of professional speech, the polite assertiveness, the diplomatic phrasing, the strategic use of silence. And then, finally, the moment arrived. I had applied for a part-time position at an international company and received a call. The interview would be in English. I remember sitting in the waiting room, reviewing phrases I had rehearsed 100 times. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm passionate about this field. Let me give you an example. But when I walked into the room, I forgot the script. The interviewer, a friendly woman with sharp eyes, asked me about my experience, and I just started talking. Not from memory, but from the heart. I told her how learning English had taught me more than communication. It had taught me resilience, patience, and self-belief. I talked about my passion for problem solving, about the joy I found in collaboration. I spoke slowly, clearly, and honestly. And when I left, I didn't know if I would get the job. But I knew one thing. I had finally spoken as myself. A few days later, I received an email. We're excited to welcome you to the team. I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. Then I whispered the words aloud, savoring every syllable. I did it. Speaking for the first time had felt like climbing a cliff barefoot. But now, I had reached a ledge and was seeing further than ever before. English was no longer the city across the valley. It was the street I was walking, the room I was entering, the world I was helping build. Despite all this growth, I stayed grounded in the understanding that language learning is a lifelong process. There are still times I hesitate. Words still escape me. I still check Google Translate now and then. But the difference is, I no longer let those moments define me. My identity is no longer chained to my fluency. Instead, I have embraced the beauty of being in progress. I don't need to be perfect to be proud. I don't need to be native to be natural. I just need to keep speaking, keep learning, keep showing up. Now, when I meet new learners shy, uncertain, afraid to speak, I recognize that look in their eyes. I remember that first day in class when I couldn't form a full sentence. And I tell them what I wish someone had told me back then. You don't have to speak perfectly. You just have to speak. That's where everything begins. Beyond words into identity. The more I spoke, the more I realized that English was not just helping me express ideas. It was helping me understand myself. There was a strange kind of intimacy in using a language that wasn't mine by birth. I found that I could talk about difficult topics more easily in English. It gave me a kind of emotional cushion, a protective distance. In my native language, some feelings were too raw, too sharp, too close. But in English, they became slightly gentler, easier to explore. When I said, I miss home, or I'm scared of failing, the words felt honest without being overwhelming. In this borrowed language, I was more vulnerable, more open, and in many ways, more real. That shift in language also changed the way I related to others. Before, I had always felt like a guest in English conversations. I listened more than I spoke, nodded more than I questioned. But now, I started seeing myself not just as a learner, but as a participant, someone with a place at the table. I stopped seeing English as something I had to conquer and started seeing it as something I could contribute to. My perspective mattered. My culture, my stories, my way of thinking. These brought richness to the English I spoke. I didn't need to erase who I was to fit into this new language. I just needed to bring all of me into it. As I grew more fluent, the boundaries between languages began to blur. I would think in English, dream in English, even argue in English. I started writing poems in English, short stories that explored memory and migration, identity and transformation. These weren't exercises anymore. They were expressions of truth. Sometimes my friends would read my writing and say, I didn't know you felt that way. And I would smile because I had finally found a way to share parts of myself that had always remained hidden. It was like discovering a room in my own heart that I never knew existed, furnished with English words, painted with new emotions, filled with light. One day, a younger student approached me after class. She was trembling, just as I once did. "How do you speak so confidently?" she asked. I thought for a moment and said, "I don't wait until I feel confident. I speak even when I don't." That was the truth. Confidence didn't come before speaking. It came through it. Every time I spoke, I collected a little more of it like coins in a jar. And slowly, the jar filled. I told her about the notebooks, the language exchanges, the recordings, the mistakes. I told her about the fear, the silence, the shame, and how speaking anyway was what had changed everything. Her eyes lit up. "Maybe I'll try tomorrow," she said. I nodded. That's how it starts. In time, I found myself drawn to helping others begin their own journeys. I volunteered at language centers, hosted small conversation groups, created video tutorials with tips I wished I had known. I wasn't a professional teacher, but I had lived the process from the inside out. I understood the emotional layers, the invisible obstacles, the power of a kind word. I saw myself in every hesitant voice, every awkward introduction, every long pause. And I knew every single one of them had something important to say. They just needed someone to listen without judgment, without pressure, with patience. Looking back now, I don't even recognize the person I used to be, the one who was too afraid to say a single sentence out loud. That person still lives in me, quietly, reminding me where I began. And I thank them, because their silence was not weakness. It was waiting, listening, gathering strength. And when the time came, they spoke. And that first word, broken as it was, built a bridge to everything I have now. Today, I use English not just to learn, but to live. I use it to work, to dream, to connect, to create. I still make mistakes. I still learn new words every week. But I'm no longer trying to prove I belong. I know I belong. My voice, once shaky and uncertain, now carries stories that matter, not just to others, but to me. And that, more than anything, is the gift of speaking for the first time, the discovery that you have a voice worth hearing. Speaking into the future. The first time I spoke English, I was terrified. My hands trembled, my throat tightened, and my voice felt like a stranger's. But now, after years of practice, learning, failing, and rising again, I look back with gratitude at that trembling voice. It wasn't fluent, but it was brave. And bravery is what every speaker needs. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to speak despite it. I realize now that every confident speaker I once admired had a moment like mine. A beginning, a stumble, a pause. The only difference is they kept going. And so did I. Today, when I speak English, it's not just about words anymore. It's about connection, meaning, intention. I've used English to comfort friends, to express disagreement respectfully, to deliver presentations, to tell jokes that actually make people laugh. These were once distant dreams, but now they are part of my everyday reality. I still remember the first time someone laughed at one of my jokes in English. Not out of politeness, but because it was actually funny. That small moment felt like a medal. Not because I was trying to be a comedian, but because I was finally myself in this new language. And being yourself, fully and comfortably, is the highest form of fluency. This journey hasn't just improved my language skills, it's transformed my life. It has opened doors I didn't even know existed. I've made friends across continents, worked on international projects, written articles read by people I'll never meet. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned to trust myself. Learning to speak English taught me that I am capable of more than I once believed. It taught me to be patient, to celebrate small victories, to keep going when it feels like I'm standing still. And now, I carry that lesson into other parts of my life too. When I face something difficult, I remind myself, you learn to speak a language you once feared. You can do this too. There are still moments when I hesitate, when the old insecurities whisper in my ear. What if you say it wrong? What if they don't understand you? But now I know how to answer. I say it anyway, because the goal is no longer to sound perfect. It's to be heard, to be understood, to connect. And the more I speak, the more I realize that everyone, native or not, is always learning. Everyone forgets words. Everyone fumbles in conversation. Fluency is not a finish line. It's a process, a relationship with the language that evolves every day. I no longer feel like I'm chasing English. We're walking together now,